They tell you that to be successful, you have to burn the boats and never look back. That you must cut ties with your small-town past to make it in the big city. But what if that's the biggest lie we've been sold? What if the very roots you tried to sever are the only things that can truly anchor you in a storm? We all feel that pull, that nagging voice that asks if the life we built is the life we were meant to live. The pain of that question is real, especially when you feel trapped between the person you've become and the person you once were. Imagine being at the absolute peak of your career, a legal warrior in the corporate world, only to be dragged back to the one place you escaped. Your mission to save your family's legacy from a faceless development giant. But here's the twist that changes everything, the kind of unbelievable irony that life loves to throw at us. What if the executive leading the charge, the person with the power to bulldoze your entire history, is the one person whose memory you could never bulldoze from your own heart, your first love? This isn't just a story about a legal battle. It's about a battle for the soul. In the next few minutes, you will discover the counterintuitive secret to resolving life's most impossible conflicts. The solution isn't to fight harder or to run faster. It's to find the hidden connection point between your past and your future. We're about to unpack how a fight that started with a threat to a family farm uncovered a shocking compromise that not only saved a community, but also proved that your greatest adversary might just hold the key to your most authentic self. Forget everything you think you know about winning an argument or succeeding in life. This story challenges the very idea of what it means to be on opposing sides. We believe that to win, someone else must lose. But what if the path to the most profound victory lies in finding a shared heart in the heat of battle? Get ready to explore a legal love story where the courtroom becomes a space for connection, and a fight over land and loyalty transforms into a powerful lesson on how to build a sustainable future, not just for a town, but for your own heart. Well, look at her go. Riley Lee, a name that echoed in the glass towers of the city, a real shark in a tailored suit. She hadn't just climbed the corporate ladder, she'd practically installed an elevator on it, all before her 30s. Life was a series of successful mergers, high-stakes negotiations, and victory cocktails. This was the epitome of a modern love affair with success, a world away from dusty roads and the scent of rain on dry earth. Her life was meticulously planned, a fortress of ambition she'd built brick by brick, far from her rural roots. She believed she had everything under control, every variable accounted for. But isn't it funny how life works? You can build the tallest walls, but you can't silence the call of your own blood. A single phone call, thick with worry and a static of unspoken fear, was all it took to make her perfect world shudder. It's a classic tale, really. You spend years running from who you were, only to find out it's the one thing you can't escape. Her meticulously organized calendar was suddenly wiped clean, replaced by a single terrifying entry: go home. This wasn't just a trip, it was a summons from a life she thought she'd left behind, a clear signal of a legacy under threat. The drive back was a time machine she hadn't asked to enter. The skyline of skyscrapers slowly bled into a horizon of sprawling oak trees. Each mile marker was a step back in time, peeling away the layers of the corporate warrior to reveal the girl who knew the names of constellations. It's like when you smell something from your childhood, like your grandmother's baking, and you're instantly transported. For Riley, the scent of fresh-cut hay and damp soil was doing just that, stirring a mix of comfort and anxiety. The looming family farm fight was becoming more real with every passing sign for a town she once knew by heart. Stepping out of her luxury sedan onto the gravel driveway felt like landing on a different planet. The air itself was different, thicker, cleaner, full of memories. Her polished heels, so at home on marble floors, seemed comically out of place. Here, sinking slightly into the soft earth. This place was the very definition of her rural roots, a foundation she had tried to build over. She could feel the impending clash, the tension between two worlds hanging in the air. The stage was being set for a brutal farm versus fortune showdown, a battle she hadn't chosen but was now forced to wage. Her parents' faces, etched with new lines of worry, told a story no legal document ever could. The hugs were tight, but the silence that followed was deafening. There was an unspoken plea in their eyes, a heavy burden they were now placing on her shoulders. Riley, the city slicker, the high-powered attorney, was now just a daughter, standing on the front lines of a fight for everything she once ran from. Little did she know, this wasn't just a simple case of what would become a legal love story. It was a collision course with a past she wasn't prepared to face. She took a slow walk through the old farmhouse, her fingers tracing the faded floral wallpaper of her childhood bedroom. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, yet nothing felt the same, because she wasn't the same. It was in the reflection staring back at her from a dusty mirror that she saw the real conflict, the sharp, guarded eyes of the lawyer superimposed over the softer features of the girl who used to dream in this very room. This internal battle, a quiet clash of identities, was the first real hearing in a case of love and litigation that was just about to begin. The enemy had a name, one that sounded deceptively optimistic: innovate forward development. Their letters were printed on thick, expensive paper filled with cold, corporate jargon that felt like a foreign language in the warm, rustic kitchen. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a declaration of war, a textbook case of corporate versus community. The documents were a formal, legal threat, but what they really communicated was a complete disregard for the human lives they were about to append. Riley Lee felt a fire ignite in her belly. This was a language she understood all too well. Her city-honed instincts took over immediately. The kitchen table, usually reserved for family meals, was now covered in property deeds, zoning laws, and threatening letters. She transformed from a distant daughter into a legal warrior, her mind racing, connecting dots, and identifying weaknesses. This wasn't just another case file, this was personal. Every legal statute she looked up was a potential shield for her family. Every loophole, a potential weapon. This was a battle for land and loyalty, and she was the last line of defense. Her parents watched in awe as she dissected the threat with a fierce precision they'd never seen before. Explaining the gravity of the situation was heartbreaking. She had to translate the cold legalese into the simple, brutal truth. A massive company saw their home not as a legacy, but as a roadblock to profit. You see, it's one thing to fight an abstract concept of progress, but it's another to look your parents in the eye and tell them their life's work is considered disposable. The family farm fight had officially begun, and the odds were stacked against them in a classic David and Goliath scenario. She had to give them hope, even when her own legal experience told her how hard this would be. The news had already rippled through the small town, creating waves of fear and uncertainty. Other longtime farming families had received the same impersonal notices, and a quiet panic was setting in. Suddenly, Riley wasn't just her parents' lawyer, she was the de facto counsel for a community on the brink. Her rural roots, the very thing she'd run from, now gave her a level of trust and credibility that no outsider could command. She was one of them, and her return felt like a sign that maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance. The weight of it all began to press down on her during the quiet, late-night hours. In the city, losing a case meant a bruised ego and a financial adjustment for a client who could afford it. Here, losing meant extinguishing a way of life, erasing generations of history from the map. This stark farm versus fortune conflict had stakes that couldn't be quantified in dollars. It was about memory, dignity, and the very soul of a community. The pressure was immense, a burden far heavier than any billion-dollar merger she had ever handled. As she sat there, surrounded by a fortress of legal papers, a single nagging question cut through the noise. Who was the architect of this? Who was the person, the actual human being, behind this sleek, innovate-forward logo? Corporations weren't monsters, they were run by people. People with ambitions, motivations, and, she hoped, weaknesses. Unmasking this anonymous foe became her obsession, the key to her strategy. She had no idea that pulling at this thread would unravel her entire world and set the stage for the most unexpected enemies to lovers twist imaginable. The day for the initial preliminary hearing arrived. A formal video conference call set to establish the key players. Riley was in her element, back in a blazer, her notes perfectly organized, her arguments sharp and ready. She had her game face on, prepared to confront the disembodied voice of corporate greed. In her mind, she pictured some ruthless gray-haired executive, a caricature of everything she fought against, and sometimes worked for. She was ready for a battle of wits, a purely professional confrontation. The laptop screen was her modern-day coliseum. Then, the screen flickered to life. The connection stabilized, and a face appeared in the executive's window. It wasn't a gray-haired tyrant. It was a face she knew as well as her own, a face that had starred in 1,000 teenage dreams and one unforgettable heartbreak. Older, yes, with new lines of stress around the eyes and a confidence that was entirely new. But it was unmistakably him, John Bailey. The air rushed out of her lungs. The entire carefully constructed case, her righteous anger, it all just evaporated, replaced by a silent, deafening shock. Well, talk about an enemies to lovers twist. The man spearheading the project to bulldoze her family's history was the boy who'd given her first kiss behind the bleachers. The corporate monster suddenly had a name, a history, and a piece of her own heart. The irony was so thick, so cruel, it was almost laughable. This was the universe playing a cosmic joke, a plot twist so dramatic it felt like fiction. Old flames. New stakes wasn't just a saying, it was her new, terrifying reality. John Bailey was no longer a ghost from her past, he was a wrecking ball aimed at her future. His reaction was a mirror of her own. For a split second, the polished corporate executive vanished, and all she saw was Johnny, the boy from down the road. His professional mask didn't just crack, it shattered. You could see the recognition, the shock, and a flicker of something else, something she hadn't seen in over a decade. This wasn't innovate-forward development versus the Lee family farm anymore. It was now John versus Riley, a legal love story that had been rewritten into a tragedy, and they were the lead actors, whether they liked it or not. The professional tension in the virtual room was immediately eclipsed by a personal history so dense it felt like you could touch it. Every word of formal introduction was a lie, a thin veil over years of unspoken feelings, unanswered questions, and a painful goodbye. How in the world did they end up here, on these diametrically opposing sides? The legal battle was no longer the main event, it was now the undercard to the heavyweight emotional match that had just been announced. And the bell had just rung, loud and clear. The rest of the meeting passed in a surreal haze. They went through the motions, their lawyers speaking in monotone. But Riley and John were having an entirely different conversation with their eyes. It was a silent, frantic dialogue of, is it really you? And how could you? And what happened to us? The seeds of a past love reignites were being sown in the most barren, hostile soil imaginable. The conflict was no longer just about land, it was about two shared hearts caught in the crossfire of their own lives. The last time Riley saw John Bailey, he was packing an old, beat-up pickup truck, his face a mixture of excitement and fear. College was his ticket out, his escape from the predictable rhythm of rural life. A future he desperately wanted and she secretly dreaded. He had promised to call, to write, to come back. Had made 100 promises in the heat of a youthful, all-consuming love. But as his taillights disappeared down the long country road, a chapter of their lives closed, and as it turned out, the sequel was never written. Or so she thought. He went off to study business and architecture, and she, a year later, headed in the opposite direction to study law. Their paths, once so intertwined, diverged so sharply it was like a schism. The calls became less frequent, the letters shorter, until they stopped altogether. Life just happened. Ambition, new friends, and thousands of miles created a chasm that youthful promises couldn't bridge. Their modern love story, the one they were so sure would last forever, became a casualty of distance and diverging dreams, a common tale of old flames that simply burn out. Now, seeing him on that screen, she was hit by the sheer weight of all that unwritten time. A decade, an entire decade had passed without a single word. He wasn't the lanky, charming boy who dreamed of building things. He was a man who actually built them, a man who had clearly succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. He was a stranger in a familiar skin, and the silence of those 10 years screamed louder than any legal argument she could have prepared. The ghost of their past love reignites wasn't just a flicker, it was a full-blown inferno of memory. For John, the shock was just as profound. He had compartmentalized his past, filed it away under hometown memories to be revisited someday. He never expected someday to be a high-stakes legal meeting. Had left behind Riley Lee, the smart, passionate girl who loved her home with a fierce loyalty. Now he was facing Riley Lee, Esquire, a formidable opponent whose intelligence was now aimed directly at him. This reunion wasn't a sweet what-if moment, it was a hidden collision. He was the face of progress, and she was the heart of the past he was trying to redevelop. The irony was staggering. He had left town to build a new life, to make a name for himself in the world of farm versus fortune, only to have his biggest project lead him right back to the one person who defined the life he left behind. It was a cruel twist of fate, a perfectly crafted enemies to lovers twist. They were two kids from the same small town who had taken vastly different paths, only to find themselves circling back to the beginning, standing on opposing sides of a battle that was deeply personal. The professional context of their meeting was a fragile container for the emotional explosion happening beneath the surface. He wasn't just the developer, he was Johnny. She wasn't just the opposition's counsel, she was Riley. How do you wage a professional war against someone whose memory is tangled up in your own identity? The unresolved feelings, the wet could-have-nones, now formed a complicated subtext to every legal maneuver, turning a straightforward case of corporate versus community into something far more volatile and unpredictable. Once the initial shock began to subside, a new feeling started to creep in for Riley, a grudging sense of admiration. Damn, him had actually done it. The boy who used to sketch buildings on napkins in the local diner was now a top executive at a major development firm. He had chased his ambition all the way to the top. She saw it in his confidence, the way he commanded the virtual room before he realized who she was. He was no longer just her high school sweetheart, he was a force to be reckoned with, and that, annoyingly, was impressive. This wasn't the reunion she ever imagined. John, on his end, was equally floored. He remembered Riley as a whip-smart, fiercely passionate girl, but he never pictured her like this. A high-powered corporate lawyer, poised and dangerous, with a reputation that likely preceded her. He had always known she was brilliant, but seeing her in this context as the defender of her rural roots was something else entirely. She hadn't just gotten a job, she had become a protector, a champion. The realization that this formidable opponent was the same girl had shared secrets with was both intimidating and, to his surprise, incredibly attractive. The conflict was immediate and intense. How can you strategize against someone you're secretly proud of? Riley found herself thinking, good for him, immediately followed by, I'm going to bury him in litigation. It was a dizzying mix of old affection and new animosity. This enemies to lovers twist was creating a serious emotional whiplash. Part of her wanted to ask him about his life, about the last 10 years, while the other part wanted to stick to the legal script and dismantle his entire project, piece by painful piece. For John, the conflict was just as messy. He was looking at the face of his primary obstacle, the main reason his multi-million-dollar project could fail. Yet, all he could think about was the way her eyes still sparked when she was passionate about something. His loyalty was to his firm, to the project, to the progress he believed in. But seeing her reignited a different kind of loyalty, one he thought was long dead. It was a classic land and loyalty dilemma, but the land was her home and the loyalty was to a past love reignites. This reunion wasn't a gentle stroll down memory lane, it was a chaotic demolition derby. Their shared history, once a source of comfort, was now a minefield. Every memory was a potential weapon or a weakness. They were two generals on opposing sides of a war, armed with intimate knowledge of each other's deepest vulnerabilities. The old flames knew stakes were higher than ever, because this wasn't just about winning or losing a case, it was about defining who they were, then and now. The success they had both achieved, the very thing that should have been a source of mutual pride, was now the very thing that made them adversaries. It was a cruel paradox. They had both escaped their small town to become more, only to have that more pit them against each other in a battle over the very place they had left. The heart of the conflict was clear, a devastating clash between corporate vs. community, with their shared hearts stuck directly in the middle. The professional gloves came off quickly. Pre-trial motions, requests for discovery, depositions, legal machinery whirred to life, and it was cold and unforgiving. Riley was relentless. She filed injunctions, challenged zoning variances, and questioned every single line of Innovate Forward's proposal. She was using every tool in her extensive legal arsenal to create a wall of red tape around John's project. This was her turf, both literally and figuratively, and she was determined to make him fight for every single inch of it. The family farm fight was now a full-blown legal siege. John and his team responded in kind. They had deeper pockets, a larger legal team, and the full backing of a powerful corporation. They filed motions to dismiss, argued that Rayleigh's claims were based on sentiment rather than legal merit, and painted her as an obstacle to economic progress and prosperity. It was a classic farm versus fortune playbook, and John, despite his personal feelings, had to lead the charge. He was the executive. It was his job to push forward, even if it felt like he was pushing against a part of his own past. Their exchanges, once filled with whispered secrets, were now reduced to terse emails between their legal teams and tense, formal negotiations. Ms. Lee's proposal is unacceptable. Mr. Bailey's firm is acting in bad faith. Every communication was a carefully crafted chess move in a high-stakes game. But beneath the veneer of professionalism, the personal history simmered. It was a classic case of love in litigation, where every legal maneuver felt like a personal jab, a continuation of a conversation they'd abandoned a decade ago. The courtroom and the conference rooms where they met became their new battleground. They stood on opposing sides, surrounded by lawyers who had no idea about their shared history. To everyone else, this was corporate versus community, a straightforward legal dispute. But for Riley and John, the air was thick with unspoken words. A slight narrowing of his eyes, a small, involuntary clenching of her jaw. These were the secret communications only they could understand. Their past was a silent third party in every legal proceeding. The tension was palpable. It's one thing to fight a stranger, an anonymous corporate suit. It's another thing entirely to look across a deposition table at the boy you once slow-danced with at the prom and accuse his company of predatory practices. Rayleigh had to separate Riley the lawyer from Riley the girl with a broken heart, and it was tearing her apart. Likewise, John had to champion a project that threatened the very legacy, under threat of the family of the girl he once loved. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was an emotional endurance test. The legal pressure mounted with each filing, each hearing, each small victory or defeat. But the real tension was internal. They were both professionals, driven and successful. But they were also just two people from a small town, caught in an impossible situation. The enemies to lovers twist had devolved into a painful, protracted war, and neither of them knew how to find a truce without sacrificing everything they stood for. Their shared hearts were becoming casualties of the fight. In the quiet moments, when the legal briefs were put away and the phone stopped ringing, the ghosts would appear. For Riley, it would happen unexpectedly. Driving past the old movie theater, she wouldn't see the for-lease sign. She'd see her and John sharing a popcorn, his arm awkwardly draped over her shoulder. It was a memory so sweet it ached, a sudden vivid flashback to a simpler time. These sweet moments were a dangerous distraction, a reminder of the legal love story that had existed long before the litigation, making the present conflict feel all the more bitter. John experienced it too. While reviewing architectural plans for the new development, his eyes would glaze over. He wouldn't see the proposed modern structures, he'd see the open field where he and Riley used to lie on a blanket, staring at the stars and talking about the future. A future that looked nothing like this. The painful irony was that he was trying to build a new future on the very ground where he'd once promised her a forever. The old flame's new stakes meant that every strategic decision was haunted by the echo of a past promise. The conflict forced them to revisit places they hadn't been to in years, both physically and emotionally. A site visit to the edge of the Lee farm became a silent, painful pilgrimage. They stood there, surrounded by their teams, discussing property lines and environmental impacts. But all Riley could see was the tree they'd carved their initials into. All John could remember was the taste of the wild blackberries they'd picked from the bushes nearby. They were on opposing sides, yet they were standing on the common ground of their shared history. It wasn't just the good memories either. The painful ones resurfaced with a vengeance. Riley remembered the hollow feeling of waiting for calls. That never came after he left for college. She remembered the slow, agonizing fate of their connection, a death by 1,000 tiny silences. John, in turn, was haunted by the guilt of his departure. He remembered his youthful selfishness, his burning need to escape, and the beautiful, vibrant girl he had left in his rearview mirror. A past love reignites not just the passion, but the pain as well. This constant stream of memories complicated everything. It's hard to maintain righteous anger when you remember the way your opponent used to laugh. It's difficult to be ruthless when you recall their vulnerabilities. For instance, when you're preparing for a deposition, you might think about how to unsettle the witness. But how do you do that when you know their biggest fear is letting down the people they love? Their past gave them a unique and cruel insight into each other's psyche, making their shared hearts both a target and a shield. The legal battle raged on, a war of documents and deadlines, but the real fight was happening inside them. It was a battle between memory and reality, between past affection and present duty. The sweet recollections made them question their resolve, while the painful ones fueled their determination to win, as if victory could somehow retroactively justify the hurt. They were caught in a tangled web of love and litigation, where every legal point was tied to an old emotional thread, and pulling on one meant unraveling the other. The breaking point came during a particularly grueling late-night negotiation. The lawyers had finally left, leaving Riley and John alone in a sterile conference room to cool off. The air was thick with exhaustion and resentment. Words, real words, not filtered through legal counsel, were finally exchanged. Frustrated and backed into a corner, Riley accused him of targeting her family, of using his power to settle some old, unspoken score. The accusation hung in the air, raw and painful, the culmination of weeks of pent-up anger. That's when he finally cracked. John looked at her, his face weary, and said something that changed the entire dynamic. "Riley, I swear to you, I had no idea He explained that he had taken on the Mill Creek development project from a high-level corporate perspective. To him, it was just lines on a map, a promising region for expansion, a challenge in sustainable development. He hadn't looked at the specific family names on the deeds until that first video call. He didn't know the family farm fight he was initiating was against her. At first, she didn't believe him. It sounded too convenient, too much like an excuse. But as he spoke, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen since they were teenagers, a raw, desperate sincerity. He explained the corporate structure, how projects of this scale are compartmentalized. It's like being the general of an army. You give the orders to take a hill, but you don't necessarily know the name of every soldier fighting on it. He was focused on the sustainable future aspect of the plan, not the individual plots of land. His regret was palpable and deeply convincing. This revelation didn't solve the problem, but it shifted the emotional landscape. He wasn't a villain who had come back for revenge. He was, in a way, just as blindsided as she was. He was an ambitious man who had flown too close to the sun and had only just realized his wings were burning down the home of his old flames. The narrative she had built in her head, the story of a malicious corporate versus community attack, began to crumble. The enemy was no longer a person, but a situation. An impossible, heartbreaking situation they were both trapped in. He confessed that since that first call, had been in his own personal hell. Every morning, he had to put on the suit and fight for a project he now saw through a completely different lens. His loyalty to the firm was at war with the ghost of his past. The land and loyalty conflict wasn't just about the town anymore, it was raging inside of him. He was on one of opposing sides with himself, and it was tearing him apart. He admitted he didn't know how to move forward without either betraying his career or destroying a part of her. Suddenly, the battle lines were blurred. The enemies to lovers' twist took another turn, morphing into something more complex. Two former lovers, now reluctant adversaries, caught in a trap not entirely of their own making. The anger in Riley's heart began to recede, replaced by a confusing wave of empathy. He was still the man trying to take her farm, but he was also the man who looked utterly lost. This wasn't a clear-cut case of good versus evil anymore. It was a mess of shared hearts and crossed wires, and the path forward was suddenly shrouded in fog. As they started having more of these tense, off-the-record conversations, Riley began to see the man John had become, separate from the boy she remembered and the corporate monster she had imagined. The old, restless ambition was still there, a fire that had clearly propelled him to the top. He was driven, no doubt about it. He spoke about progress, efficiency, and growth with a passion that was both impressive and, given the circumstances, infuriating. That core part of him, the need to build and achieve, hadn't changed at all. It was the engine behind this entire farm versus fortune conflict. But there was a new layer to him, one she didn't expect. He was more thoughtful, more reflective. He wasn't the single-minded boy who just wanted to escape. He spoke about the responsibility of development, the ethics of progress, and the importance of community impact. He wasn't just bulldozing ahead, he was wrestling with the consequences. It was a maturity forged in the fires of corporate boardrooms and high-stakes deals, a nuance that the teenage version of John Bailey could never have grasped. He was still driven, but now his drive seemed to have a conscience. She saw it when he talked about his vision. He wasn't just trying to build a generic suburban sprawl, he was genuinely excited about creating a sustainable future for the region. He talked about green building materials, community spaces, and local job creation. It's like someone who only ever eats fast food suddenly discovering gourmet cooking. He had the same hunger, but a much more refined palate. He was applying his immense drive to a more complex problem than just build bigger. This wasn't the simple black and white villain she'd been fighting. This new understanding was deeply unsettling for Riley. It's much easier to fight a caricature of greed than it is to fight a thoughtful, intelligent man who simply has a different worldview. The enemies to lovers twist kept getting more complicated. She could see glimmers of the boy she loved, now intertwined with the ambition of the man she was supposed to despise. It made the fight harder, because she could no longer dismiss his arguments as pure corporate evil. He was making points that, on some level, she had to admit were valid. Their dynamic shifted from pure adversaries to something more like intellectual and emotional sparring partners. They were still on opposing sides, but now they were truly seeing the person on the other side of the battle line. The conflict was no longer just about her legacy under threat, but about his legacy too. What kind of man did he want to be? One who hit his quarterly targets at any cost, or one who could build something meaningful without destroying the past? He was grappling with that question, and she was the one forcing him to face it. She realized that the boy who left town to find his fortune had found it, but had also found a complexity he hadn't bargained for. He was a man in conflict with himself, and his reunion with her had brought that conflict to a boiling point. The past love reignites not as a simple romance, but as a catalyst for growth and self-examination for both of them. He was still her opponent, the biggest threat to her family's farm, but he was no longer her enemy. And that, she knew, was a very dangerous development. The formal negotiation sessions, once stiff and mediated by lawyers, began to bleed into long, informal, late-night debates. After their respective teams had gone home, Riley and John would often remain, surrounded by cold coffee cups and scattered documents. The pretense would fall away, and they would talk. Really talk. The conversation shifted from legal points and financial figures to the big, messy questions: what is the true meaning of progress? And what is the price of forgetting where you came from? Riley would argue passionately for legacy, for the intangible value of history etched into the land. She'd paint a picture of her rural roots, of a community built on mutual support and a connection to the earth, something that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. To her, legacy wasn't just about preserving one family farm fight, it was about honoring the very idea that some things are worth more than money. She would ask him, what's the point of building a shiny new future if it's built on the graves of 100 histories? John would counter, not with cold corporate logic, but with his own deeply held beliefs about the future. He'd argue that legacy isn't static, it has to evolve or it dies. He'd talk about the young people leaving town for opportunities elsewhere, like he did. He'd speak of the need for a sustainable future that could support the next generation, offering them a reason to stay. A community that doesn't grow withers, Riley had insist. Preserving something in amber isn't honoring it, it's letting it become a relic. Their debate was the very essence of corporate versus community. These conversations were a high-wire act, a delicate balance between their roles as adversaries and their history as confidants. They were on opposing sides of a fundamental values debate, yet they listened to each other with an intensity that no one else could command. He would challenge her nostalgia, and she would challenge his idealism. It was from courtroom to connection, a shift from legal posturing to a genuine exploration of their conflicting worldviews. The battle for the land became a battle of philosophies. The ghost of their shared past was always present in these debates. When they argued about loyalty, they weren't just talking about land and loyalty, they were subconsciously talking about their own history, about the promises they made and the paths they took. Every argument about the future was colored by the unresolved feelings of their past. This wasn't just a debate, it was a continuation of a conversation they should have had 10 years ago, a clash of who they had become in the intervening decade. Through these debates, they were unknowingly building a new kind of bridge. The legal chasm between them was still wide, but the personal one was shrinking. They were seeing the world through each other's eyes, even if they didn't agree with the view. The foundation of their legal love story was being rebuilt, not on shared memories of the past, but on a newfound respect for the people they had become. The question was no longer just who will win, but is there a way for us both not to lose? You can't spend hours locked in intense, soul-bearing debate with someone you have a history with and not expect the old embers to glow. The chemistry between Riley and John, dormant for a decade, came roaring back to life. It was in the way they could finish each other's sentences, even in an argument. It was in the lingering eye contact across the conference table, a silent acknowledgement that this was more than just a business deal. The past love reignites, and this time it was fueled by a potent cocktail of adult respect, intellectual sparring, and unresolved tension. But oh, the complications. They were adversaries in an active, high-stakes legal case. Every smile, every shared laugh over a ridiculous legal precedent felt like a betrayal of their professional duties. Riley would feel a pull towards him, a warmth spreading through her chest, and would immediately follow it with a wave of guilt. She was supposed to be fighting him with everything she had, not finding him charming. The professional boundaries they tried to maintain were like chalk lines in a rainstorm, constantly blurring and washing away. The situation was a minefield of emotional tripwires. One moment, they'd be in a heated argument about zoning laws, two fierce opponents in the family farm fight. The next, he'd say something that sounded so much like the boy she used to know, and her defenses would crumble. This enemies to lovers twist wasn't a smooth transition, it was a chaotic, confusing dance. They were trying to navigate a legal labyrinth, while simultaneously navigating the even more treacherous maze of their own shared hearts. Their team started to notice a knowing glance from Riley's co-counsel, a questioning look from John's deputy. The shift in atmosphere was subtle but undeniable. The tension between them was no longer just antagonistic, it was electric. It's like trying to hide a fire in a dark room. You can pretend it's not there, but everyone can feel the heat and see the flickering light under the door. Their rekindled connection was becoming a dangerous, unspoken factor in the love and litigation. This created a new internal conflict for both of them. For Riley, letting her feelings grow felt like compromising her family's future. How could she fight with absolute conviction for her legacy under threat if she was falling for the man threatening it? For John, his returning feelings for Riley made him question his own ambition. Was this project, this pinnacle of his career, so far, worth the pain he was causing the one woman who had ever truly understood him? Their professional roles and their personal feelings were on a collision course. They were walking a tightrope without a net. The professional world demands clarity, boundaries, and objective distance, but their situation was anything but clear. It was messy, emotional, and deeply personal. The chemistry was real, undeniable, and incredibly inconvenient. It complicated every decision, every negotiation, every single interaction. They were on opposing sides, yet they were being pulled together by a force that neither of them knew how to fight. During one of their late-night debates, in a moment of frustration, John unrolled a different set of blueprints. "You think this is just about concrete and profit, don't you?" he challenged her. These weren't the master plans his firm had officially submitted. These were his personal project renderings, filled with detailed notes and ambitious ideas. Riley, skeptical but intrigued, leaned in to look. What she saw started to dismantle her black and white view of the project. This was more than just a housing development, it was a vision. The plans detailed a commitment to a sustainable future that was genuinely impressive. He had incorporated rainwater harvesting systems, a community solar farm to reduce energy costs for all residents, and extensive green spaces that connected with existing local parks. He had even allocated a portion of the development for a modern agricultural co-op, a place where smaller farms could pool resources for processing and distribution. This wasn't the work of a man trying to destroy a community, it was the work of a man trying to reinvent it. Riley, the sharp corporate lawyer, immediately began to analyze the plans with a critical eye. She cross-referenced his proposals with local needs, environmental impact studies, and economic forecasts. And damn it, he was right. His plan, if implemented correctly, wouldn't just benefit the new residents, it had the potential to provide much-needed infrastructure and economic stimulus for the entire town. It could offer the rural roots of the community a way to thrive in the modern world, not just survive. The corporate versus community narrative suddenly had a new, complicated chapter. This discovery threw her into a state of profound conflict. For weeks, she had been the champion of the opposition, the warrior defending her home from a faceless corporation. But now she was looking at a plan that offered a genuine, tangible benefit. It wasn't a perfect plan, it still required her family's land, but it wasn't the destructive monster she had painted it to be. The enemies to lovers twist was now forcing her to question not just her feelings, but her entire legal strategy. She saw the passion in his eyes as he explained the details. This wasn't just a job for him, it was a legacy project. He truly believed he could create a model for how development rural communities could coexist and even strengthen one another. He wasn't just fighting for his company's bottom line, he was fighting for his own vision of progress. The old flame's new stakes now included a startling possibility. What if he was right? What if fighting him meant fighting for a future that was ultimately worse for her hometown? This knowledge changed the game entirely. The battle was no longer a simple family farm fight against a greedy developer. It had become a complex negotiation about the very future of the town she loved. She held the power to potentially kill a project that could bring jobs, sustainability, and a new life to the region. The man she was fighting was offering a lifeline, even as he was asking for a heartbreaking sacrifice. The lines between hero and villain were now completely, irrevocably blurred. Seeing the conflict in Riley's eyes, seeing her genuinely consider his vision, had a profound effect on John. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope that this legal love story didn't have to end in mutual destruction. But that hope came at a cost. His firm, Innovate Forward, wasn't interested in nuance or compromise. Their mandate was clear: acquire the land, follow the original, most profitable plan, and maximize shareholder value. His more thoughtful, sustainable ideas were seen as passion projects, tolerated but not prioritized. The more time he spent with Riley, listening to her talk about her family's legacy under threat, the more hollow his corporate talking points began to sound, even to himself. He would sit in board meetings, defending the company's aggressive strategy, while his mind was back in that dusty conference room, debating ethics with her. The disconnect between his professional obligations and his personal convictions was becoming a chasm. His heart and his job were now on opposing sides. His superiors started to notice his hesitation. He was pushing back in meetings, questioning the timeline, and suggesting costly modifications to the plan that prioritized community integration over speed. "Are you getting soft on this, Bailey?" his boss asked, a sharp edge to his voice. It's a simple land acquisition, but it wasn't simple. It was Riley's home. The land and loyalty conflict was no longer an external battle, it was an internal civil war. His loyalty to the firm that had made his career was wavering, challenged by a rekindled loyalty to the girl who had helped shape his youth. The past. Love reignites, and with it, a part of himself he thought had left behind. The boy who cared about more than just winning. He started to see the project through her eyes, and the view was deeply unsettling. He saw the faces of the families his firm's letters had terrified. He saw the legitimate fear behind the family farm fight. He was the architect of that fear, and the realization was a heavy weight on his conscience. Was this the kind of success he had left home to achieve? He found himself sabotaging his own side in small, subtle ways. He'd forget to counterfile a minor motion until the last minute, giving Riley more time. He'd argue for a more generous compensation package in internal meetings, citing community relations as the reason. He was trying to mitigate the damage, to find a way to serve two masters, but he knew it was unsustainable. Sooner or later, he would be forced to choose the firm or the farm, the career or the connection. The farm versus fortune battle was forcing him to decide what his own fortune was truly worth. His feelings for Riley were the catalyst for this crisis of conscience. She was the human face of the collateral damage his company was so willing to accept. Loving her, even the memory of her, made it impossible to remain detached. Their shared hearts were now a liability to his career. He had to make a choice, and he knew that whatever he decided, he would lose something important. He was questioning everything, all because of the woman he was legally obligated to defeat. The idea didn't come in a flash of brilliance, but emerged slowly from the wreckage of their late-night debates. It was born out of exhaustion and a mutual desire to find a third way, a path that wasn't total victory or total defeat. What if, Rayleigh said one night, tracing the outline of her family's property on a map, you don't go through it? What if you go around it? It was a simple question, but it unlocked everything. A compromise, not a surrender, but a synthesis. A second-chance romance for the town itself. John, whose mind was already reeling from his crisis of loyalty, seized the idea. They stayed up all night, sketching on napkins just like they did as kids. But this time they weren't designing dream houses, they were designing a future. They started to craft a hybrid plan. A plan where the core development was rerouted to preserve the historic family farms, including Riley's. In this new vision, the farms wouldn't be obstacles, they would become the heart of the new community, a living link to its rural roots. The plan was audacious. It integrated his vision for a sustainable future with her demand to protect the town's legacy. The development would bring modern infrastructure, new housing, and the agricultural co-op had envisioned. But it would do so by building around the existing community, not on top of it. The corporate versus community battle could potentially end in a partnership. The family farms would be protected by a conservation trust, ensuring the legacy under threat would be secured for generations. It was the perfect embodiment of their journey from courtroom to connection. They took their opposing viewpoints and, instead of letting them clash and destroy each other, they wove them together. His drive for progress and her passion for preservation created something stronger than either could have conceived alone. It was a plan built not on legal strategy, but on mutual respect and a deep, albeit complicated, understanding of each other's values. Their shared hearts had finally found a way to align. Presenting this to their respective sides would be a massive gamble. John would be effectively defying his firm's directives, proposing a less profitable, more complex plan. He would be putting his career on the line for this compromise. Riley would have to convince her parents and the other skeptical farmers to trust the very developer who had been their enemy for months. She would have to ask them to believe in a modern love story between old and new, between tradition and progress. But for the first time in months, they both felt a sense of hope. The enemies to lovers twist had led them to an unexpected place collaboration. They were no longer on opposing sides. They were partners, co-architects of a fragile, beautiful compromise. The proposal was more than just a blueprint for a town. It was a blueprint for their own relationship, a chance to build something new and lasting out of the rubble of their past conflict. Bringing the proposal to her parents was one of the hardest things Riley had ever done. She laid the new maps out on the same kitchen table where she had first declared war on Innovate Forward. Her father, a man of few words and deep principles, stared at the plans with a skeptical frown. Her mother wrung her hands, her face a mask of worry. Trusting John Bailey, the man who had caused them so many sleepless nights, felt like a betrayal of the family farm fight they had all waged together. Hayes the fox guarding the henhouse, her father muttered, and Riley's heart sank. Riley didn't argue with legal points or economic projections. She spoke from the heart. She talked about the changing world, about the need for the town to find a way to thrive, not just survive. She used their own language, talking about crop rotation and seasonal cycles, explaining that communities, like farms, sometimes need to adapt to a new season to keep the soil healthy. She asked them to see the compromise not as a loss, but as a different kind of harvest, one that could secure a sustainable future for their grandchildren. The turning point came when she talked about John. She didn't defend him as a corporate executive. She spoke of him as the boy they knew, the man who had changed, who was risking his own career for this compromise. She explained his internal land and loyalty conflict and how he was choosing their community over his company. It was the human element, the story of his personal transformation, that began to soften their resolve. They were being asked to believe in a second chance romance, not just for Riley, but for the boy they once saw as one of their own. Her father walked to the window and looked out over the fields, land that his family had worked for over a century. He was the guardian of that legacy under threat. He had been prepared to lose everything to fight for it. But he was also a practical man. He saw the wisdom in the plan. He saw that refusing to bend could mean eventually breaking entirely. The world changes, he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. You either change with it, or you get left behind. It was a reluctant, but profound acceptance. Ultimately, it was their faith in their daughter that sealed the deal. They had seen her fight for them with a brilliance and ferocity that made them burst with pride. If she, their champion, believed this was the right path, who were they to stand in her way? They gave their blessing, not with joyous celebration, but with a quiet, hopeful solemnity. They were placing their trust in her judgment, and by extension, in the fragile peace she had forged from courtroom to connection with her old flame. Their support was the crucial first step. With the Lee family on board, the other farming families began to listen. A united front of opposition began to transform into a council of cautious collaborators. The path ahead was still uncertain, and the battle with John's firm was far from over. But the most important foundation, support of the community and the family at the heart of the fight, was now firmly in place. The seeds of unity had been planted. Armed with their hybrid plan and the community's support, John and Riley faced the final boss, the Innovate Forward board. It was a tense make-or-break presentation. John, in a stunning move of land and loyalty, didn't just propose the compromise, he gave them an ultimatum. He would either build this new collaborative vision, or he would resign and take his considerable talents elsewhere. He bet his entire career on this, on Riley, and on the belief that corporate versus community didn't have to be a zero-sum game. The board was shocked, then furious, then intrigued. Riley, acting as counsel for the newly formed Community Preservation Alliance, presented the undeniable legal and social benefits. She demonstrated how the partnership would generate immense positive PR, avoid years of costly litigation, and create a nationally recognized model for sustainable future development. She and John stood side by side, no longer on opposing sides, but as a united, formidable team. They turned a hostile takeover into an irresistible investment in a positive legacy. Miraculously, the board agreed. The final signing of the agreement wasn't held in a sterile courtroom or a corporate high-rise. It took place at a town hall meeting in the local community center. The atmosphere was one of celebration and relief. The family farm fight had ended not with a winner and a loser, but with a partnership. The documents they signed represented so much more than a land deal. They were a peace treaty, a business plan, and a testament to the power of finding common ground. The case of love and litigation had settled out of court in the most spectacular way. With the legal battle over, the professional boundaries that had so complicated their feelings dissolved completely. Standing on the porch of her family's no-safe farmhouse, looking out at the sunset, the tension between Riley and John was finally free of conflict. It was just them. The lawyer and the executive were gone, leaving only the two people who had found their way back to each other through the most unlikely of circumstances. The enemies to lovers' twist had completed its final beautiful turn. He reached for her hand, his touch sending a familiar spark through her. "I guess my past love reignites argument was more persuasive than I thought," he said with a small smile. She laughed, a real, unburdened laugh. It was a compelling case. All the pain, the conflict, the late-night debate had all led them here. It had forged a connection far stronger and more mature than the youthful affection they had once shared. This was a second-chance romance, built on a foundation of respect, understanding, and shared victory. The story of the farm salvation became a local legend, a tale of how old flames, new stakes led to a brighter future for everyone. But for Riley and John, it was simply their legal love story. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest developments aren't built with steel and glass, but are rekindled in shared hearts. The farm was saved, the community was revitalized, and a love that had been lost for a decade was finally, beautifully home. It's amazing, isn't it? How the biggest battles in our livest ones for our legacy, for our land, for our loyalty are so often intertwined with the quiet battles inside our own hearts. The story of Riley and John is a powerful reminder that sometimes the only way to build a new future is to make peace with the past, transforming a legacy under threat into a foundation for growth. Their journey shows us that what starts as farm versus fortune can end in a truth that benefits everyone. This story was a testament to the idea that our rural roots don't have to be a weakness in a modern world, but a source of profound strength. If you believe that our past doesn't have to be a battlefield, but can be the groundwork for a sustainable future, show your support by hitting that like button. It's a small click that tells us these are the kinds of narratives that matter, the ones that explore how old flames, new stakes can lead to incredible outcomes. Now we genuinely want to hear your perspective in the comments below. What was the real turning point for you in this legal love story? Was it when he revealed his ignorance of her involvement, or the moment they began co-authoring that beautiful compromise? And be honest, did this enemies to lovers twist conclude in a way that satisfied you? Or were you secretly hoping for a different kind of ending? For more stories that explore the complex space between opposing sides and celebrate the powerful redemption of a second-chance romance, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more journeys to share, and you won't want to miss a single one.